Hi there, this is Steve Kimes with Mennonite. I'm talking to Shelley Campagnola. Okay, now go ahead and say your last name again.
Campagnola.
Okay, see, do you hear the difference and hear how she's pronouncing it different than I, because I don't pronounce things very well. All right, anyway, and Shelley is with MCRS, Mennonite Coalition of Refugee Support. And we're going to be talking today about refugees and their work and how that's going on. So, Shelley, first of all, tell me where you guys are at. Where are you located?
We are in Kitchener, Ontario, which is about an hour east of Toronto. Or sorry, okay. West of Toronto. Let me get my geography straight there.
And you guys are in the Waterloo area, right?
Yeah, Waterloo region.
Okay. And so you guys support refugees. That's the name of your organization. Where do these refugees come from, and how, in general, how do you support them? What do you do?
Okay, so we actually primarily support people who are called refugee claimants. Those are people who don't yet have refugee status, but they are looking to finally have a safe place to be in Canada. And they have come to Canada through very different means. People right now, we have people from 35 different countries. And they have come to Canada because they have a personal target on their back. Somebody has tried to harm them or kill them for a variety of reasons. And when they come to us, they need to begin the claim process to get refugee status. And so we help them with all the documentation, getting it completed. We help them with translations, interpretation. We help them access a lawyer. We help them prepare for their hearings. And we help them through each stage in all of these supporting things that have to be done. We also help them get settled in the community. So we help them find a place to live. We help them get access to a number of community services. And we become really their friend and their second family while they're going through the process.
So you say that these folks have a target on their backs. You mean by personally, or by an organization, by a government, or is it a variety of things?
Yeah, all of the above. These are people who primarily were leaders in their communities. They could be human rights activists, former government officials, journalists, teachers, community leaders, speaking up about the things that are happening in their community and refusing to go along with the things that shouldn't be going on, and they become targets. And not just targets in terms of oh, we don't like you, but we've had people who have been imprisoned, they've been tortured, they've had their businesses confiscated, they've had members of their family disappear, they've had children kidnapped, and they have been personally injured. And the police and the court system and the government system could be a part of that. And if not a part of it, they are unable to bring about justice and protection for that person.
So you guys are a Mennonite Coalition. Does that mean that you guys who are helping refugees, you're only Mennonites? Is it generally Mennonites, or it's just like, well, Mennonites started it, but we're really open for anybody who wants to come and help?
We began as a coalition of the Mennonite community back in 1987. As we were experiencing a number of people coming from Central America, particularly Nicaragua at the time with all the civil unrest there. And the Mennonite churches recognized that these people did not have the help they needed. They didn't have the English language. They didn't understand the documents. They didn't know how to get settled in a very different way of life than what they had come from. And so they came together and they formed a coalition called Mennonite Coalition for Refugee Support. And over the years, that coalition has grown to include other faith groups and non-faith groups and organizations and community people who all agree that people need a chance to be heard and a chance to receive justice and to be safe. And so we help them get the best opportunity to have that happen.
Now, I know that in the Portland region where I'm at, we have one organization that provides the kinds of services that you provide, and everybody does that. Are you guys the only refugee service organization, or are there others that you work with?
There are a number of organizations that have varying degrees of involvement, particularly with claimants. The YMCA sees a number of claimants come to them for programs and will occasionally help depending on where the particular branch is located, but often will refer to us because this is all that we do as opposed to a whole bunch of different programs. There's also the KW Multicultural Center that primarily exists to help newcomers that have status already, permanent residency or citizenship and need help, but have recently taken on some work to support refugee claimants in their process. But we have been the go-to organization and pretty much remain the go-to organization because of the long time that we've been doing it and the expertise and proficiency, but even more so because of the way that we do it. Clients come to us, they have been through a lot. They've been through trauma. They've been through a lot of suspicion and all kinds of negative experiences, and they're frightened when they come to us, not sure if they're going to be believed. And by the time they leave after their first visit, many of them say that they feel like they have found a friend, they have found a second family, and they feel like that they matter. Their humanity has been recognized, their personhood has been respected, and we treat them with great welcome and care. And that has been one of the distinctive markers that has meant this is why we continue to be the go-to organization.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you then, I mean, this is kind of a bigger philosophical question, but why do you do what you do? I mean, what are why help refugees? Is it a particularly, is it from a Christian perspective? Is it from a biblical perspective? Is it just because, well, I feel like being good people, but then if you just want to be good people, why specifically help refugees? What's the motivation behind this?
Yeah, it's we could just be like another social service agency doing a good thing, but we're not. We were rooted from our beginning days in the belief that care for the foreigner, for the stranger, for the one needing refuge is the overflow of the heart of God. We talk about, God created in the beginning human beings, and he created a home for them. And while we know from the biblical records that the relationship between humanity and God has not always been what God would want it to be, and they've been on the move, that God is a God that is with them in that movement, and that he is a homecoming God. He wants people to come home theologically, sociologically, relationally, to know who he is. And we believe as an organization that it's our responsibility to represent that heart of God. We speak often of the Good Samaritan and how that experience was one of people and systems walking past the need in order to protect themselves as opposed to the person that had need. And we have said we are the Good Samaritan, that we reach out regardless of who that person is, where they have come from, what they believe, because our job is to create a space of welcome where they can have opportunity to discover that there is more to God than maybe what they knew about or had never known about. And we are the ones that can help advance that conversation that they may have with between them and God.
Wonderful. So what is in general, kind of what's the process that that a refugee would have to go through in order to be welcomed? You already said a little bit that you are dealing with refugee claimants, that they aren't so what is the process? How does one even kind of get into the country? We know that from our perspective, from the United States perspective, it's getting more difficult to get into our country. How do people come in and make a claim that they are a refugee, and how do they obtain refugee status in general?
Yes, so we know that for example, there are 22 million people moving around the world trying to find safety, and just a handful of them make it to North America. Primarily, they would come to the U.S. Having obtained a visa from the country that they have started from. Some of them come through a little more quietly than that, as we know in our Canadian history, we have what's called the Underground Railroad in our history, where many people were helped quietly to get from one place to another. But for the most part, people they will try and travel with a visa. Once they get to Canada, they need to establish that they do want to make a claim. Anybody who is a refugee or is making a claim to be a refugee has to go through the same process. Where that process happens is really the only difference. So a government-assisted refugee has gone through the same process as a refugee claimant, but they've done that maybe in a refugee camp, or in some other place in their country of origin. A privately sponsored refugee has done the same thing. They've gone through the same process in their country of origin, or again in a refugee camp. The refugee claimant goes through that process once they arrive in Canada. That's the only difference, is just where the process starts. For each person, they have to go through an eligibility screening, which includes a security screening to make sure that they are not a threat or have a criminal record that would be of concern to the Canadian population. Each of them has to demonstrate elements of the definition of a refugee, so threat of harm, threat to their well-being, threat to, for example, religious persecution, could be sexual orientation persecution, so some threat of harm or imprisonment or even death. As it relates to a refugee claimant, they have to demonstrate that the threat is personal and not just a generalized condition. So, for example, some countries we know are in such an incredible state of upheaval that everybody is suffering. That is not sufficient to be called a refugee claimant. A refugee claimant must establish that that suffering is very personal, that their name is on somebody's hit list, and they have already been targeted and have experienced the consequences of that.
So I'm sorry. So if a refugee is living in an area which has severe famine, or there's war going on, and they're just like, well, I've got to leave this war situation because a bomb's going to drop on my head, that isn't sufficient for them to have a refugee status. Is that correct?
Exactly. Only when the United Nations and the government agree that somebody, there's enough people experiencing that. So, for example, the war that's going on in Syria, and that people need to be resettled out of that place. Will they be given opportunity to come to Canada as a refugee? They may be categorized as a refugee, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be resettled here. For a refugee claimant, someone individually claiming to be a refugee because of personal circumstances must be able to prove those personal circumstances and that they cannot be safe. The government, the courts, the police cannot keep them safe where they are.
And in the meantime, so you guys are helping folks move through that process in order from becoming a refugee claimant into a refugee, and you said that you are helping him provide housing and living situations and provide interpretation and helping him through the bureaucracy. It's interesting that here in once again here in Portland with the refugees, a lot of times there is one main central area where a lot of the refugees settle for a period of time, where they live in a large apartment complex before and then once they have their status established, then they'll get another job and they'll move somewhere else. Do you guys have like a central place where people go, or do they are they just wherever they happen to be in the city?
Yeah, we're set up a little differently in terms of our organization, and we're somewhat distinct, for example, from organizations that might be in Toronto, which is an hour east of us, or in Windsor, which would be a couple of hours west of us. We don't actually have facilities to house people. So we work very much with a referral approach where we identify people in the community who might be willing to take people in for a little bit of time. We help, we work with the emergency shelter system. We do have some other organizational partners that can provide some limited housing for a short period of time. The biggest challenge in our region is the affordability of a lot of the needs. So, for example, our clients are coming with very little financial resources, and it's not that maybe they didn't have a lot of resources where they were, but they can't access it, or it got confiscated from them. And so we help them get initial support through our social service assistance organization in town called Ontario Works, and they can get a small amount there, which really is, for example, a single male with no children with him would get $721 a month. The cheapest apartment right now in our area for, say, even a bachelor apartment goes for about $900 a month. So they're not making enough to be able to rent their own place. So we try to get them connected to people who can take them in for a little bit until they can get jobs, until they can start making at least a basic income, and try and get them connected to services that can help them find places to live, get them food to eat, get them clothes to wear, get transportation, get medical care, all those kinds of things. We work very closely with a number of partners because they're better at that piece than we are. So, we work with family outreach programs to ensure other kinds of support services and counseling and all those kinds of things, so that we can focus on what we do best, and that's helping through the claims process and loving our clients. And we can count on our partners to do what they do best, and that's helping our clients get settled and have their needs met.
That's great. It was a number of years ago, but my wife and we took in some folks, some refugees, and what would happen, the way that it worked is that we would take folks in just as they came into the country. They would settle into our house for 3 to 6 months until other housing was able to be provided for them. And that was a fantastic opportunity, a fantastic way to connect with people. And of course, there's language barriers and amazing cultural barriers. One of the things, one of the families that came in, they had a young child just a little bit older than our son at the time, so less than a year old, and they came from a village which had dirt floors, and they didn't have anything like diapers, so they would just let him do his thing all over our house. And we had to say, well, okay, in our culture we use diapers because our carpets can't deal with that. Anyway, and so it's really a great it's a great experience, a great way to learn about cross-cultural communication and both the difficulties and the opportunities that provide.
Yeah, there are some great experiences, and that's exactly the model that we prefer, where people can get into those close living opportunities where they can learn the culture, be immersed in it. And everybody benefits from that kind of a situation, as long as everybody can stay open to the challenges and the opportunities that come with that.
So let me ask you, so you're taking in refugees in Canada here, as it's pretty well known in the US. We're having more and more difficulties with welcoming refugees and immigrants in general. What would you say are some of the main differences between you guys being welcoming as a nation and the US being welcoming as a nation?
Right. I think we have a different mindset, I think, in terms of the multiculturalism and the nations coming to us. We have schools, for example, where there's easily 150 different languages spoken in those schools. It's just kind of a way of life for us. And we have for a long time been recognized as a nation that is quite comfortable having different multicultural communities living side by side and doing their thing, and that we can do this well. I wouldn't say that Canada, from a formal perspective, has necessarily always been a very welcoming, and I would say that actually a lot of our policy is less than welcoming. But the people as a whole would say that we're comfortable with people coming. There is a little bit of nervousness right now. There's a sense, the number of people crossing the borders right now, or between border points coming from the States, has left people a little unsettled. But that's really actually more a matter of just the way things are being handled, as opposed to it being actually a crisis or a problem. We recognize some of the changes that are happening in the States. We recognize the things that are happening around the world. And we've had people coming to Canada since Canada began. So it's just that right now they're coming, in clusters and coming to key points that, and those key areas end up a little stressed in terms of the services that they can provide immediately. We're also dealing with a system that is underfunded in terms of the Refugee Determination Board. And so what happens is hearings get delayed, and people end up in limbo for a long time. And that can leave the Canadian population wondering if the system works. But the system is actually quite rigorous. And so starting from that initial screening to determine if they're eligible, right through to when they might get their final yes, you can stay, or no, you're going to be deported. It's a very rigorous process, but we are very much about due process in Canada and ensuring that the process is allowed to play out. So that's why you get a number of people who are crossing between the border points, and they get arrested on the other side of the border, but they get a chance to be heard. And I would say, from our understanding of what we're hearing in the news, that is probably the distinction right now, is people are getting a chance to be heard, even if it means breaking the law to get that voice.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who are deported in the United States, but people are getting their chance in court. But like for right now, they're doing mass groups of refugees in front of the court, because the courts are overwhelmed and they can't do it, which means each individual doesn't get heard on their own. If they came in a group, they may end up going to court as a group. And it's, on the one hand, our system is overwhelmed. It's very difficult for people to be able to be heard, and also it's very difficult for people to it's very difficult for, or they end up waiting a very long time, years, just to be able to do that. How long is your guys' process? I know it's different for different people, but I mean, in general, what would be the assumption about how long that process would take?
So it's changed rapidly even over the last couple of years. Of course, we've had government policy changes that have also impacted the timelines. But right now, we're working on a first in, first out basis. And there have been additional people assigned to cases that have been waiting for a while. But we are telling our clients that based on the first in, first out and the number of claims that are presently in backlog, that they can expect to wait around 20 months to 2 years for their first hearing. So might as well get settled in, might as well start contributing to the community, and might as well not, keep looking at the calendar to wonder, are they going to get heard? What's going to happen? Because that's roughly the timeline right now. However, we are seeing some good movement. We are seeing some claims. We're looking at people, for example, 2016, those claims seem to be starting to be heard at a rapid pace. We did see some people come in last year that had their claims heard. Some of them, even with the first in, first out, there is still a process of recognizing that some situations are much more urgent than others. And there seems to be a sensitivity to that more often than not. And so recognizing that people coming from particular countries are likely to be approved because everybody understands what's happening in those countries, and that it's not just a general situation, but it's a very personal situation, even if it's for a large number of people. So the government is trying to move those ones forward rather quickly. The ones that where it might be more questionable, where there might be doesn't seem to be as urgent. Maybe they're an individual and they don't have any families that are at risk back in their country of origin. Those ones might get delayed a little bit longer.
So I'm looking at my notes here that Ryan sent me, and he told me something about a safe third country agreement. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what that is. Could you explain that to me? What is that?
Yeah, it's an agreement between Canada and the United States that they signed in 2004, basically stating that each country was safe for people, that the country as a whole was a safe place for people to be, and to help each country manage their own refugee system to ensure that people weren't going back and forth across the border, trying a claim here, if it didn't work there, to try a claim in the other country. And so the goal was that somebody arriving to either Canada or the US that was going to make a refugee claim would make it in that first country that they came to. And so that they would not be allowed to make it in the other country. They wouldn't be allowed to use the one country to get to the other country to make a claim, because both countries were considered safe. That agreement is effective, is for refugee claimants, so people coming to the border, and it's effective only at the border points, so land crossings. And it was felt at the time when that signing was done that was the only that's where people would come, and it could be dealt with very quickly then. What's happened is with the just the change of political administrations and some of the rhetoric that has been happening, people have become frightened of what their outcomes might be in the U.S. And so whether that's people who are already in the U.S. as undocumented people and their temporary status is going to end, or whether it's people who are in the U.S. and have made a refugee claim but are now questioning whether it's going to be successful because of where they are from, or it's people who are overseas and are maybe part of the population that the border at the U.S. has been closed to, or they're just hearing that maybe the U.S. isn't quite so safe after all, so they're trying to get to Canada, and if they were to go to a border point, they would be turned away because of the agreement, and so and never get a chance to be heard. They know that if they cross between the border points, they will be arrested, but they will be given a chance to be heard. And so, so many people are now trying to bypass that agreement by going between border points, knowing that they'll at least get a chance to be heard before they are deported right away.
So, I mean, you probably wouldn't say this, but it sounds to me like perhaps a good counsel for someone who, let's say, is coming from Latin America and wants to find a safe country to perhaps bypass the United States and go directly into Canada. Would you say something like that might be a good idea?
We would be careful to counsel people on how to get here, but from an objective, position. Understanding the nature of the agreement and understanding some of the political tones and understanding, even our own prime minister saying, come, welcome to Canada, understand that it's a rigorous process, but you will get a chance to be heard. I could hypothetically say, yes, it might be good to try and find a way to get straight to Canada.
And I would say, from my perspective, I mean, since 2001, the United States has become a less safe country. I don't know that I would say that we are not a safe country. There are still many immigrants that come in and find good places to stay here. But part of it depends on which part of the country you're in. The United States is of course huge, and we have different attitudes in different parts of the country. And then, of course, there are different attitudes to different kinds of refugees. Certainly, a family that is obviously Muslim is going to have a harder time in our nation right now. That is not to say that there aren't more people willing to defend the immigrants, but there's still the hostility isn't just on the governmental side; it's all across the board. So, for instance, here in Portland, which is a very welcoming city to refugees, there was an obviously Muslim woman on the train. A man started verbally attacking them and threatening her, and three men came up to defend her, to basically put themselves between this verbal attacker and them. And the attacker pulled out a knife and struck all three men, and two of them died. And so it's kind of and so in general, I mean, we have people who are willing to protect, but I'd say, well, the context is more hazardous now than it has been in my memory for a long time.
Yeah, I think there's a heightened sensitivity in light of things that have happened, both on our own soils as well as around the world. And it's understandable that people are frightened. The average everyday person really doesn't have a whole lot of control over what happens. And fear is a driving force of the human nature. And when it's uninformed fear, it's an even stronger force. There's a lot that is portrayed to us, whether it's through media or through political talk, or even through these kinds of incidences that we tend to generalize and magnify. And that's been happening again since time began. I mean, if you go back to Cain being, kicked out of the garden and kicked out of relationship with God, essentially, he was worried that no matter where he went, somebody was going to take his life. And, I need protection from that, he said, and was granted that protection. But, you can see throughout the scriptures where people were afraid of the other, that they did not know, didn't understand their motives, didn't understand the situation that they were running from, because it's so foreign to us. I mean, we can't really fathom some of the things that are going on in the world and some of the ways that human beings treat other human beings. And so when it shows up to us, it's quite scary. And when we do have these kinds of consequences, when we try to stand up for what's right, I would say rather than that, causing us to be afraid, certainly we want to move forward with caution, but rather than being afraid to the point of saying, not in my backyard, understand that that's what most of the people who are looking to us for safety have been living with all their lives. And so we're getting a taste of what their life has been like, and that should move us to compassion, not to rejection.
And I would say that most of it is just straight fear, without a lot of cause. All these refugees that are coming in, yes, certainly there are very few of them that may pose danger, but that's why the process of looking at people's criminal history, looking at all of that, that is the safeguard for the country. And I'd say that for both Canada and the United States, that process has been a relatively effective one.
I think it's been very effective. And I was just discussing with someone, with a group this morning before our time together. For me, given the process, I actually feel safer with the people being allowed across the border who have been screened and vetted and checked into than I would feel with some of, the people in my own community that have grown up here all my life. It's who I don't know anything about and nobody's looked into. And when I look at the criminal patterns that are happening, many of them are from people you would never have even considered being a problem because they look like me. They've grown up in my community. I might have even gone to school with some of them. And, I went to school with someone who was charged as a serial murderer last year and convicted as a serial murderer. Who would have known, right? So,
yeah.
I taught people who have ended up, hurting children and all that kind of stuff. So I actually feel better about the people who are allowed across the border after having been vetted. I am less concerned about them than about the ones that, might be in my neighborhood that I know nothing about.
And that's the thing that I found is that people have in my community, there's a lot of people who are just afraid of poor people, just poor people in general, and afraid of people who look different than them, and they're going to spread rumors about certain people of color or certain people who are from other countries, and I can't believe. In the Christian circles that I have are how people are so openly hostile to Muslims. It just shocks me. Now, part of that may be because I've been to Muslim countries and I've met many different Muslims from many different stripes, and I have a general idea of what they're like, and they're people, and they're good people, and they're really wonderful to talk to, and they're and all that. And so to hear people make such claims, well, Muslims are this way, is just stunning to me. And it seems anti-Christian, anti-Jesus to make such assumptions about people.
Yeah, when we look at what's going on in the world, to tie some of the horrific acts to a particular religious group or a particular ethnic group or a particular country is of deep concern to me, because quite frankly, I'm not sure that there is any group that has clean hands. And each throughout our history, including the Christian history, has had some very distressing ways of being and carrying their faith. And so today, we can talk about how Muslims are being attacked by Hindus, and Buddhists are being attacked by Muslims, and Muslims are being attacked by all kinds of people, and Hindus are being attacked, and there isn't a group, if you look throughout the world, where there isn't some kind of hostility to the point of death being caused, even in a country, for example, like South Sudan, that's supposed to be a Christian country. You have Christians killing Christians, so, and killing Muslims, and Muslims killing Christians. I actually would say that it's not actually about the religion. It might be a misinformed application of the religion at best, but really it's about a humanity that finds a way of identifying itself in different groups. We like to do that. We label ourselves, we find ourselves in affinity groups, and we use those to advance the greater concern, and that is what is in our hearts and minds towards the other person. And to bunch that all together, and then again, when we think of the media and the stories that are portrayed, it is scary for some. If you think about ISIS and Boko Haram, or the Lord's Army in the Congo, I mean, there is some idealism behind these, or ideologies rather. There's religious tones to these. But there's much more. The greater narrative is actually about just this propensity for humanity to do horrific things to other people, and that's the piece that we need to look at, because as we get closer to people, as you've had the opportunity to as well, we discover that they are just as much a victim of the very thing that the rest of us are afraid of as well.
I totally agree. It seems like one of the big problems that we have is we put a label around our group, and we say, okay, these are the good guys, and so anybody who has attacked one of us and all that, now we're going to put them in another group, and we're going to put a label around them, and those are the bad guys. And so that means that any of us in this good guy group, now we are allowed to attack and harm people in the other group. And isn't that kind of the opposite of what Jesus said? Something about love your enemies. And if we're supposed to love our enemies, which we Mennonites love to talk about, maybe doesn't that partly mean that maybe we should tone down the rhetoric and actually meet people and try to communicate and love each other?
Yeah, we are, as Mennonites, we are called as a people of peace, and to be not just a people of peace, kind of quietly, passively, but to be peacemakers. And that's a very active piece. That's a very active call. So, you think of Matthew 5, where Jesus says, turn the other cheek. That's not a passive thing. That was a rising up and calling the other person to account. Do you want to strike me again? A little more intentionally this time, because it would take an intentional act to do that. So that was actually an act of peacemaking, as opposed to saying, "Go ahead, do it again. I'll take whatever you throw at me, and I won't try to resist in any way." I think the strongest force that we have as Mennonites and as Christians who are Christ followers is to actively bring about peace in the way that we resist the things that are wrong, the way that we pursue truth, the way that we listen long enough to find out each person's reality, and that takes risk. There's no question about it. But we have before us, a Lord and Savior who did the ultimate risk in order to make that possible for us to do that, and calls us to reconciliation, not to rejection. So I think, as if we choose that route, yes, there might be consequences, and the enemy might win periodically, but in the moment. But the longer term story is that God has already won, and He's asking us to engage others so that they might know that too.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for bringing that out. So I want to just have people know, if they wanted to support MCRS or find out more about what you guys are doing, how would somebody do that?
Yeah. So it's important that people understand we do not receive any government funding for what we do. We are not eligible to receive that funding. Government doesn't want to be seen as helping refugee claimants. So we do rely on our on donors and organizations through charitable giving and donations. And that's easy to give to us by just going to our website, mcrs.ca. And there is an online giving donation portal there where they can give through their credit card, through their debit, and they can give as a one-time gift, or they can give set up a monthly donation. We would love that. It brings some stability to our funding base and helps us to remain agile as we respond to the ebbs and flows of what we do. And yeah, it's very easy to do, and we would very much love the support, because again, those are the only resources we have available to us.
And if somebody wanted to ask questions about MCRS or some of the work that you did, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
They can contact us by phone if they would. They'd like to. We don't have a 1-800 number, but they can also contact us through email, and the best would be just refugee@mcrs.ca.
Okay, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for going through all the trouble. We had a little bit of technical difficulty earlier on, but I'm glad that we were able to get through that. This has been a really good conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Hey everyone, this is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at mcrs.ca. It's the hub for all things Menno Nerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, and we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have two options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out mennonnerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.